Morning. All right, we're going to be looking at day 4 here. If you guys want to open or go to your wiki, so day 4. Before we look at the examples, creating kind of do's and don'ts. I'm not going to go through all of these, but you might, if you're, whenever you have time, if you're interested. These are really the main, the common things I discuss. I would say 90% of the feedback that I provide my students is in this list of how many are there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 things. Well, there's other here. But it seems it's really not a lot of things, but most of the things that we talk about pertain to these things, like try to avoid detractions, the active voice. We talked about that. We talked about non-referential it, the passive voice. It has been found. It has been seen.
Could you show me what it is?
Sure. I don't know if I can get the whole.
Oh, okay.
But just so you can find the same list in the wiki. You can have access to it. Some things pertaining to APA, but yeah, this is just kind of a list that I wanted to share with you all, and you may be able to relate some of these, maybe some other things that you've seen as well. Certainly not all the types of errors, but again, most of the things.
Like, what do you think, for example, in that one that you have, including too many indirect citations as cited in? Sometimes it's hard to find the main source.
Exactly. So we have direct citations and we have indirect citations. So indirect citations are, as Tony mentioned, as cited in. So it's when one author is quoting someone else, and we want to quote that person. Generally, the idea is I'm not against using indirect sources, but when you look at sources, we know that they should be valid and reliable, and we want to try to get to the main source as much as we can, that is the direct source. So the idea is to try not to have too many indirect sources throughout the entire work. That's the idea. So I don't have, when I just work with each student on an individual basis, trying to encourage them to try to find the main source. But certainly, if they can't find it, there's going to be some limitations. If they can't find the original source, they're going to have to use the place. But again, we just don't want all these citations to be with too many indirect sources, because then it becomes less reliable. It's like using just books or even like textbooks as a source, which is not really a good source, right? It's we want direct primary research articles that are coming from direct studies so that we can have better support ideas. So, but yeah. Anything else that jumps out or that you want to comment on? A lot of it has to do with formatting. My students, I know I drive my students nuts with formatting, spacing. We talk a lot about spacing. And I think this is where I think we have an opportunity as all teachers in the BA, if we can come up to some sort of a consensus on what we agree on what the formatting is, so that whenever, regardless of the course, we're asking students to produce a text that we're consistent. So by the time they come to 7th semester, 8th semester, they're not hearing this for the first time. Oh, I never knew that. I never really had to do this. I'll share you an example of just talking about format. This is, of course, from last semester. And I'll show you a finished literature review and look at the way just the formatting here. So, with regard to formatting, just starting here, this is the title of the literature review, and then the text begins here. This is the introduction paragraph. What do you notice here? Just looking in terms of formatting, not necessarily the text itself, but just the formatting. What do you notice here so far? What observations can you make with regard to formatting?
It's not justified.
Okay, so it's left justified. Left justified, so this side looks weird. My students don't like that. They want it to be lined up over here. But it's APA, so left justified. What else do you notice?
Double space.
Double space. So double space to, let me open it up over the line. It's double space. Now, what we mean by double space, obviously, we're referring to space between lines, right? So this between here and here is a double space. Okay, what else? Yes, this paragraph, like all paragraphs, should have an indentation. And how far do we indent? Yeah. Don't use tab. Don't use the tab. Why not? All right. This, I'm not going to be able to show you because there are limitations on Word Online. But let me open up the Word documents, and I'll show you why. Say hi. Hi, Mike. Hi, Dad. We're screen share, so we don't have to worry about person here. Where? And every class, every semester, I have the same conversation with students about formatting. And it goes something like this. And this is about, I do exactly what I'm about to do. So we have our text. Now, we have our paragraph. To format, and we have to show them this because by default, if they don't do anything with Word, if they just start typing in Word, we know the format's going to be wrong. They actually have to go into Word and change the formats, and that's sometimes the problem. So here's our first body paragraph, and I ask you to go into this icon here, formatting, and go to opciones de interlineado. All right. Now here's what they have to do. There's like 4 things they have to do here. The first thing is under especial anterior, make sure that this is 0. Well, by default, it's 0. There's no problem there, but just make sure that it's 0. This is the problem here. By default, Word automatically adds space after each paragraph. Okay? I think it looks nicer that way. So we have to change that to 0. Here, we have to make sure that it's double spaced. Okay? And the 4th thing is to make sure we click this little box. No agregar espacio entre párrafos del mismo estilo. Those 4 things. Except that. Okay? And so that's one thing. So if they do that, and if they have it, I ask students to do that from the very beginning, but even if they wait to the very end, all they have to do is copy all of the text and just do it one time. They don't have to keep doing it over and over and over. If they do it from the very beginning, let's assume that this is the first part of my text, I can continue working now and I'm good to go. It's gonna respect that same format the rest of the document. So it's not difficult, but there's 4 things that they have to change. And if one of those things is wrong, it's not going to be read. So that's one thing. Now, going to the indentation. Similarly, yes, you could use a tab, but what I do is, first of all, we need to make sure we have the ruler. So by default, it doesn't show the ruler. And we need to change this from centimeters to inches. And all of this is, it's kind of a pain if you're doing this with the version from Spanish, because you got to go through all these steps. Let's see if I can do this really quickly. Let's be lanzados. Where is it? Is it lanzados or German? As many times as I've done this, I should remember. Here it is. So we change it from centimeters to inches. Okay, now why do we do that? Well, because the indentation should be ½ an inch. If you try to tell the students, you need to do an indentation by 1.254, I mean, it's kind of difficult. So select the text. You can select all of the text or whatever you have, and then go to this top slider bar over here. Bring that thing right over here. This is ½ an inch. This is 1 inch. And you do it one time. You continue working. Next paragraph. It respects the same. We don't have to do it again. With the tab, you have to do it over and over. And sometimes if the spacing gets, if you add it accidentally space, it gets weird. So that's another thing that I share with my students. And yeah, so formatting, that's formatting for spacing and indentation. Let's go back here. What else do you notice?
That the title is, there's no space between the title and the text.
Right, it's double spaced. It's equal spacing between the heading and the text. So just as I showed you earlier, if we go here, let's see. See here, this is correct. There's no space. Sometimes by default there'll be more space after the text, and after the heading there'll be more space for the text. So we want to eliminate that extra space. So that's another thing. What else do you notice?
Main words in the title.
All right. So this is what level of heading is this? One. Level 1 heading. So level 1 heading is what? Center. Bold.
Capitalizing main words.
Main words are capitalized. That's the main.
And which level is everything capitalized?
Everything in capital letters?
Right, that would be the level 1. And this is, when you say that this is level 1?
Well, yeah, this is level 1. I'm
And
not sure
everything, all the words, all the letters.
Main words must be capitalized.
yeah, or the letters of the word, yeah.
Okay, which level is when all the letters are capitalized?
I don't think there is.
I don't think
No. Maybe
Maybe there's no.
No.
And that's a good point. Students should never write any words in all uppercase letters. There's never, we don't want to write any words in all uppercase letters.
that is a problem in English, I think.
I'm sorry?
That is not correct in English.
That's not correct? Yeah.
To write like everything capital letters,
No.
that is not correct.
The
Yeah,
title, just the title,
not even the time.
the cover.
I don't have it, never. No.
The good thing is that everybody says, follow up, but everybody has a version of up in every institution. Yeah.
But I haven't
At the
seen,
end-
but I haven't seen an APA, I haven't seen anything where it says all upper.
I know they don't say, but it
But some
depends on
people
the
have-
institutions.
So, so this is a level 1. Now, what do you notice here, this heading? What level is this? A level 2 heading. So level 2, right, is obviously a subheading of level 1. So level 2 heading, what do you notice?
That is on the.
Right, it's left justified. What else?
Bold, capital letters.
Bold, capital letters, and it's on its own line. There's no text after the heading. This is a level 2. What about this one?
3.
Level 3. Let me see if I can find another example of level 3. This is a level 3 heading. What do you notice?
Only capitalize the first word and then the period and then you continue.
Right. This one is a little bit different. It's part of the paragraph, so it's indented, so it's part of the paragraph. Only the first word is capitalized. Ends with a period, even though it's not a sentence. It ends with a period, and only the first word is capitalized. So this is kind of the oddball heading. So level 1, 2, and 3. I have yet to find the reason to have more than 3 headings. And this is a thesis. This is like a 2,500 word literature review. So I don't think we need more than 3 based on 3 headings for text. Some shorter works may only need 2. I think APA goes up to what, 5 or 6? 5 headings. But yeah, 3 with 3 headings. Usually that's so yeah, that's basically it. You see here citations. Let's see. Let's go down to references. Okay, we're not going to go through all this, but this is there's a lot of details with references. Okay, what text is italicized? What letters are capitalized? For example, in this example, what type of source is this? It's an article. It's an article from a journal. And what does this represent? What is this? It's the title of the article. What do you notice?
Capitalized first letter.
All the first letters capitalized. Okay. And what is this? American Journal of Educational Research. It's the title of the journal. What do you notice? It's italicized and it's capitalized. What's this first number represent?
The edition, the number.
Close, yeah. What's the common word we use for instead of edition? Typically it's referred to as the volume, the volume number. And then the second number, what do we call that? What is it?
That refers to if it's quarterly or sometimes there are 4 issues in 1 year, for example.
This is strange that is.
All right, so yeah, the first number is the volume number. The second number in parentheses is what we call the issue number. And sometimes one volume will have several issues associated with that one volume. So sometimes you won't find the issue number. Most of the time there's a volume number. So usually this issue number, you may see it, you may not. Right? So if it's off, that's fine if there's not one. But almost always there'll be a volume number. Followed by pages. The pages of what?
The article.
The article. It's not necessarily the pages where the citation is found. It's the entire article. The first page of the article to the last page of the article. And then retrieved from where the person got the article. Okay, in our case, almost all the students get their work online, whether it's a book or an article, but not always. If they go to the library here, of course, they don't have that. Okay. Let's see one more example. How about these are almost all articles.
My phone.
It was one book.
Oh, here, there's one. She had a lot of.
I saw a book.
Okay, this one. Building background knowledge. Okay, what kind of reference is this?
What page?
What do you think, Marzano? What do you think? Is this what type of source? Is this an article, a book, a journal, a web page?
A web page.
Our page.
You should, I guess.
No,
Because association is that a publisher? Association
no, because we
or?
have the web page in the end. The link.
That's an electronic book.
It's a book. Yeah, it's a book. Now, the reason it says retrieve from is because if she happened to find this book online, probably from eBury. eBury is a database that's part of the university and they have access to all these books. So she more likely got this from the eBury database. So we start off with the author, the year. What is this title of the book? What do you notice?
Yes.
Only the first word is capitalized. What else? Italicized, or it's in italics. You can say that. It's in italics. What? And notice here. What's this? You see here. The first word is capitalized here, and then we have colon, which is very common in a lot of titles. And the first word after the colon is also capitalized. Yeah.
What is Alexandria? It's the city.
Yeah, that's title correct. Yes. Right. So I think we have to kind of remind the students is to capitalize on the first letter here. Here's the confusion, right? The titles, the main words are capitalized. The headings in the text, the main words are capitalized, but some of the titles of the articles and the books, only the first word is capitalized. So there's confusion. They're like, well, when do we capitalize and when do we not capitalize? So you have to kind of make the distinction between headings have their own set of rules, and then the titles of articles and books have different rules. Okay, and then we have Alexandria, Virginia. This is the city and state.
So association that is the publisher?
Yes. Now, this, putting the country is not necessary. When it's in the United States, only the city and state. Okay, so she could remove USA. It would be basically removing USA, putting the colon right after VA. All states in the US have a 2-letter abbreviation. So we use the 2-letter abbreviation, Virginia. And then Association of Supervision, this is the publisher, and then retrieve from because she got it from probably eBury, yes. Or no, maybe she just got it directly from ASCD. Okay, there's one more that I know she has this. Okay, this one, Smith. Now, what do you notice about that? What kind of source? What source is this? It is a book, but how does this differ from the one we just saw?
Because different
Because she didn't buy the book.
articles. It's a main
Sorry?
edition, right? But there are different kind of articles in different authors.
Right.
Compilation related to the same topic.
Yes, there are chapters. There are book chapters. And each chapter has a different author. And yes, you have editors who are in charge of the whole book, but you have specific writers for each chapter. So let's take a look at this one. We have Schmidt. So imagine you've got a book and different chapters. You have different chapters, different authors. The question is, Schmidt, where does that come from? Does that come from a book editor, like you would see it on the cover, or would you see it in the chapter of the book?
You mean
Schmidt.
his name?
Yes.
No, it's me.
He's who's in charge of everything.
No, here in the first time? No. it was
The first
exactly-
one is a chapter
Here?
book.
Yes, exactly. The first one is the writer, and on the other
This-
one, it was coordinator.
Yeah, because the title in italics refers to
The name of the book.
All right, vamos. All All right, let's go one at a time here. So Schmidt is the writer of the chapter, correct? All right. Now, the year, this is the year of the, where do we find the year, this year? Actually, it's the book, because usually the book, the year will apply to the whole book. So this is the year of the book.
Vocabulary learning studies is each chapter.
Yes.
And this vocabulary learning strategies is what?
The name of the chapter that you wrote in the same book.
The name of the chapter.
And the titles.
And then we have,
and
in Schmidt and McCarthy. So where do these
The
names
name
come
of
from?
all the
The
family.
book. These are the editors of the book. When we have more than one, we put in parentheses EDS. Where it's only one editor, it's ED. And then we have a comma, and then we have vocabulary. What is this?
That's the title of the book.
Title of the book. And then we have, what is this?
Pages where you can find the chapter.
Pages of the chapter. And then we have, then we have the location and the publisher, Cambridge University Press, and the link.
I have the book.
Great. So you're good with it?
You know Schmidt?
Not personally, no. I've never met him.
He's an American living in Nottingham, UK. He's doing a presentation in Turkey this year. You should go there and meet him.
I should. I don't have any
He's
lawyers.
an expert in vocabulary,
Great.
Let's go to this.
along with Bold Nation.
Okay. All right. So here we have. So I just want to share with you. This is generally the format that students that I come in contact with are asked to work on. And all right. So let's go back here to our wiki. Now I was looking, and I noticed some of you have been uploading some of your text. Do you want to look at some of your text as a group and discuss? Do you feel comfortable with doing that?
You can check home.
Yeah? When we work with students, because this is how I work with some of my students, and sometimes they feel uncomfortable right at the beginning of the class sharing this work, sharing in front of the class. So I asked from the very beginning how they feel about it, try to kind of warm them up to this idea. Usually after a few times they don't feel too uncomfortable about it. But let's look at some examples. What I'd like for all of us to do, if you're signed in, if you can go to your wiki, go to page or day 4, and click, let's see, positions. All right, if everybody can click on example 2. Okay, so again, wiki, day 4, example 2. Okay, what I'd like to do is have you read through this, and I'd like for us to talk about it, and I'd like for you to make some observations. Now, I'd like for us to make some observations here aloud in class, but I'd also like you to add comments. Okay, so if you're connected, just add a comment. It can be any comment about this text, positive, constructive, or even ask a question. But take a look at this. I'll give you a few minutes to read through it, and we can discuss it, but try to come up with some comments and observations about this text.
We're doing theme and ring.
We can discuss anything you want to discuss. It's example 2, yes. So go into wiki, day 4. And under day 4, example 2, this should take you to this page, because you have to go directly to this page to leave a comment underneath this text. And if anybody wants, if you're not connected, you want to just upload a comment, I can pass around the keyboard.
Okay.
Okay.
Sorry, since I was talking with So getting to the example of that, is here for what we're going to do, the comment about what?
Okay, so anything that you, just look at it from a kind of critical standpoint, like if things that you think that the writer did well, or if you have some constructive criticism. I think yesterday we talked about reading and theme, if you want to talk about reading and theme. We've talked about cohesion, as far as the way in which ideas are organized. But it can be about any aspect of this writing, any comments that you feel you want to share, both constructive and or positive or.
I would say that, okay, here you need some kind of evidence because there's no any source. So.
Okay, so there are no
For example,
citations.
if the first one is the topic, learning a new language makes students reconstruct their perception of teaching. As learning new language is learning, so that is the evidence, or it is something that supports. So it should have a source. So I would say the author. I don't know who. We don't know because we are just inventing. So I would put it at the end, just parentheses, is simulating that I have an author and here, where is it? Here, it's supposed to.
All right, I'm gonna suggest something here, and this is partly because this is only a 5-day workshop.
Yes.
And we're used to evidence sentences including citations typically, right? If we're gonna include evidence, we typically want to do that. But for the sake of time, a lot of us obviously have not been able to investigate, read, and get it done. So I want us to look at all these examples that we have time to look at today. Try to look at the text itself to see if there is an example in there that provides evidence, even though there's no citation. Okay? Because it's really easy to be able to see, well, if there's not a citation, but try to look into the actual text itself, the meanings of the text, and see if there's an example of an evidence. When I say evidence, think of an example, a detail, right? Something that is saying what, how, where, why, when of the topic.
Well, the evidence could be the new language gives them, and the following sentence: these past experiences reconstruct or transform.
Okay.
And then like a conclusion. This means that.
All right. Would you like to summarize that as a comment?
So we have the topic, then
maybe list like refer to the number sentence. Maybe you can say if you're trying to reference something, maybe talk in terms of the first sentence, the second sentence, third sentence.
So the first sentence is the topic. The second. Like the main support, the second one. And the third and the fourth would be the evidence, and the fifth one is like a conclusion. This means that, and you close.
Right.
And I think it's following the chain, like as learning a new language is learning a new way of thinking, one idea. Then the perception of what teaching is because it's a consequence. Because one thing takes you to the other one.
Okay. Expands because of the new language, okay? And then furthermore, the new language.
Because one modifies your thinking, and then you can have the second one. A new perception of what is saying. Because you are modifying your thinking.
Okay. Anybody else?
And it's theme and green, The
All right.
first sentences.
All right, so look at the first
Talking about
sentence.
learning, so theme, and then green.
All right, so looking at the first two sentences, did the writer follow the same thing you read, or did he or she change the reading to the theme? Just looking at the first two sentences.
Follow the same as learning.
Remember the two general patterns, right? We can use the same theme with the new reading, or we can change the reading. Pattern two would be changing the reading of the first sentence to the theme of the second. So the question is, did the writer use pattern one or pattern two? How many people, how many do you think? Yeah, the first two only, the first two sentences. How many of you think the writer is using the first pattern? Same theme, new reading.
Because learning a new language makes students recognize the construction of it. So the theme is learning a new language. And then the second, as learning a new language is learning a new way of thinking, then he gives the new thing.
Okay, so the writer's using this.
Following theme and read, theme and read.
No, the second one.
Okay, so pattern one is the same theme,
With a new
new reading. How many of you think he's following or she's following the same theme, new reading?
In the second one,
Well, in the first two
the first
sentences.
one is theme up.
Well, I'm not trying to, I know I'm not explaining myself. I want us to look at the first two sentences.
Yes.
Not individually, but the first two sentences together, first two. Now, the question is, what pattern has this writer used to connect ideas from the first sentence to the next? We have two patterns. The first pattern is using, in the second sentence, using the same theme from the first sentence, using a new reading. That's one pattern. Or the second pattern is changing the reading from the first sentence to the theme of the second. That's the second pattern. So the question is, in these first two sentences, did the writer use the first pattern, or the second one?
The first one.
Theme.
All right, first sentence, what's the theme?
Learning a new language.
Second sentence, what's the theme?
Learning a new language.
Is that the same?
Yes.
Is that the same thing?
Learning a new language is learning a new way of thinking, that's the thing.
Are they the same?
Yes.
Is this theme the same as this theme? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, so the writer is using the same theme, new reading, the first pattern. Someone? No?
Yes.
In fact, the writer is actually using what's called direct repetition, right? Looking at the discourse analysis, we say it's direct repetition, the same words. Now, the writer could have changed this. He or she could have used a synonym, hyponym, hypernym. He could, right, different ways. But yes, this is an example of using the same thing.
Learning a new way of thinking is learning a new language.
Yeah. All right, so learning a new language, as learning a new language is learning a new way of thinking. The perception of what teaching is expands because of the new knowledge. I'm sorry, a new language, sorry. Furthermore, the new language, all right, so let's look at the second and third sentence.
Theme and read, and then you read.
All right, so what is the theme in the second sentence? What's the theme?
The theme of the second sentence?
Yes.
Learning and learning.
Learning a new language, or is learning a new language. The ream is basically everything else.
Yes.
Okay? The third sentence that starts here, what's the theme?
The new language that it was the ring of the previous one.
Right, so here's an example now to switch from the second pattern, changing the ring to the theme. ¿Estamos de acuerdo?
Yes.
Okay. The new language gives them this new notion that teaching is something different from what they have had experienced in the past.
Again. Yes,
The
ring.
ring becomes the theme in the next.
These past experiences, all right, using, again, almost direct repetition, right? Using direct repetition. Right now, the writer doesn't have to use direct repetition. How could this be worded differently to avoid direct repetition, just as an example? So, but keeping this, changing the ring to the theme. How could he or she say this differently?
By changing the verse to verbs.
But as an example, like how, instead of saying these past experiences, what could another way of saying these past experiences? Just another way of saying that, because this idea is coming from this experience in the past. Any ideas about how you can say it differently? I mean, there's nothing wrong with this, but it's just another way of saying it.
These past experiences?
Uh-huh.
Previous knowledge.
Okay, let's try to segue that into reconstruct. So let's keep reconstruct or transform. What would we say before that to lead right into reconstruct? Right, we want to keep this, reconstruct and transform. So what could we say here differently?
This previous knowledge begins to.
But are we talking about knowledge or experience? Or let's see.
What they got, what they lived.
What they had experienced in the past.
Which will reconstruct?
Which? Okay.
Will reconstruct or transform?
Can we try to imagine what type of experiences the writer's talking about? Like, what would be like an example that could be a possibility?
So it is learning experiences. He's talking about learning experiences, yes.
Maybe. So what might he or she say?
Teaching.
Maybe the old-fashioned learning.
The way they learn.
Old-fashioned learning, reconstruct and transform?
Can be.
Okay.
Can be.
Yeah, the idea is to try to think maybe there's something here that could be more specific, possibly. Okay, remember another organizing or organizational structure is going from general to the specific, right? So looking at it at a paragraph level, this might be an opportunity to move this idea of some sort of experience in the past and give an example of that experience, whatever that experience might be, or something.
So you say that we could write, for example,
Well, you could use the phrase, for example, but you don't have to. But yes, it is an example, right? So it is an example, but you don't have to say it's an example. But yes. Okay. So,
Grammatically, they have had experience with that. Possible? They have had experience.
they have had.
Or they
They have had. Let's see.
They have experience, or they.
Something different from what they have had experienced. What they have had experienced. What they experienced. I would probably change. I would say something like different from what they experienced in the past, or different from what they have. What they have experienced. You could say that. Right? I have experienced. You could say have experienced or had experienced if we're talking about the past. Yeah.
This previous knowledge acquired
These, all right, so this means that the experiences, let's look at that sentence. This means, this is the last one, this means that the experiences they are experiencing while learning the new language allow them to reconstruct this perception of what teaching is. Okay, comments about the last sentence?
I need to have some examples to understand better the ideas.
All right, so we're going to close.
For me, it is necessary to read about some examples of these experiences and how they transform and reconstruct that.
Okay.
This is the personal conclusion. So you say, okay, this is my topic. All of these are my evidences, etc. And then I, the writer, concludes.
Right, so in this last
That is
sentence,
my explanation. The last sentence. This means that is what my thought.
okay, all right.
It is like that, and I don't have here the.
All right, any other observations? How do you feel about the phrase, this means that? Especially where this sentence is in the paragraph. This means that. Is there another way of saying this means that?
Therefore,
Therefore.
I would say that.
Therefore, and another option?
Thus.
Thus. You could say thus.
Is thus used in American English?
Sorry?
Is thus used in American English?
Yes.
Is nowadays? Is it used in
Oh, yes. Therefore would be is a little bit stronger for closing the idea than thus, but thus certainly can work. Thus. Typically I see thus more within the middle of the sentence, thus this happens. Therefore, for me, sounds a little bit more like you're drawing a final conclusion. Therefore, right? But you know, I would prefer, I think, one of those transitional phrases more than this means. We might say, in other words. In other words, this. With my students, we have to be careful because they tend to overuse. In other words, this means, like, because basically what are you doing when you say, in other words, you basically say this, you say it twice. You say it this way, and then you say, okay, in other words, this. Usually when students do it, they're saying the same thing to different things. It's not a conclusion. You know what I mean? It's not a conclusion of what they said. Even though they're using a transitional phrase that means kind of a conclusion, they will just say one thing, and then they'll say the same thing, just a different way.
Paraphrasing.
Paraphrasing, exactly. They're paraphrasing, they're not really going anywhere. They're just saying the same thing again. So it's like they're filling up, you know, empty, and yeah, they're not really writing coherently.
Probably, well, I don't know, but probably, the word experience, synonyms, using over there synonyms, or something, because I see it like several times. Experience, experiences, experiencing.
Right, so, yeah, so, right, so we can use synonyms. This is a good time to talk about synonyms, hyponyms, and hypernyms. We know what synonyms are. So it's two words that have similar meanings, hyponyms and hypernyms. I think another word for those two, discourse analysis.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
It's, what is it? Superordinate, subordinate, subordinate. Okay, I typically use the word hypernym, but I think subordinate, subordinate. So just to review, what is a hyponym and a hypernym? Hyper and hypo. So hyper means what? And hypo? So hypernym and hypo. So if I say city, the word city is a hyponym or a hypernym of the word Aguascalientes. City, which one would it be, hyponym or hypernym? City is a hyponym or a hypernym of the word Aguascalientes? Hypernym. So city, the word city is a hypernym of Aguascalientes. Aguascalientes is a hyponym of the word city. We can do it with animals, we can do it with anything, right? So dogs, Doberman Pinscher, right? So when we're trying to figure out, okay, how can we, what other words can we use instead of the word experience? We can use synonyms, we can use hypernyms, we can use hypernyms, depending on what it is. Those are the options. So.
Well, we say, therefore, the experiences that they have had while learning, and that's it.
Right. If we back up here, like we mentioned here, this is why I think too. I think the writer can get out of this, right? Trying to use different words. If he or she used something more specific here, then the writer could reference this in context as conclusion, right? To be more specific. So instead of just saying experiences, saying, teaching in front of class, learning how to, whatever the experience is, right? And, you could even just get rid of the word experience and talk about the type of experience that you're just being more specific from the very beginning throughout. And then you're not, because
but maybe, well, at the very beginning you need it because you are talking about all the experiences. And then you give it some specific aspects.
Well, but this is our topic sentence, right? Learning a new language makes students reconstruct the perception of teaching. Perception of teaching. That's what we're talking about. Now, if we're going to talk about, this is our general concept. We don't want to go more general typically. If anything, we want to go more specific. So what can we talk about? We can talk about what is the perception of teaching or whatever. Students construct, we can talk about that. Or some sort of learning a new language, talk about that more specifically. And perhaps we don't even need the word experience, right? Because then that would also clarify a little bit more in detail what it is we're trying to talk about. Does that make sense? And these are suggestions, of course, right? But, these are things, this is, for me, the fun part of writing, right? You look at an idea like this, and you look at it, or you write it, you look at it again, and say, okay, how can I, dig deeper or modify? If someone else were reading this for the first time, which is very hard to do. I always tell my students, try to have, imagine somebody reading this for the first time. Would they understand what you're trying to say? And go back and look at your own writing and say, okay, how can I be maybe more specific or change something? Okay, any other observations or comments or questions about this example? The final thing I would say at the very last sentence, I don't know if it's a rule or not, but as a general, a general rule that I try to follow is not to close a sentence with a verb at the end. It's not horrible or anything, but I would probably try to say, allow them to reconstruct the perception of what teaching, means to students, or what teaching.
I love something from this perception of teaching,
or the perception, reconstruct the true meaning of teaching, or something like that. Okay. Any other comments, questions? If anyone wants to leave comments, feel free, or later, whatever.
Yes, okay.
Can we look at another example?
Yes.
Armando, would you mind if we look at your example? Okay.
Or you bored?
All right, so here we have an example. Take a look at it, give you a few minutes here.
Okay, it is always important. I will take always a
All right. I know some of you have to go to the meeting.
Yes,
That's fine. So, observations?
And I still mentioned that it is always important.
It's always important for the teacher to adopt a positive attitude towards the student speaking. So the observation is to avoid always and important. Why?
And always.
Maybe. In few words. How would you explain to a student? You say, no, don't use that. And you say, well, why? Why not? I like it. What's wrong with that? How would you explain that?
Como dice mi hijo, siempre y nunca es lo más difícil de sostener esta vida. But also it is because, for example, in newspapers, journalists, you can use all of this great, always very, in academic writing, yes, you cannot use it. Because academic writing, all of this needs to be based on research, and we always have exceptions, different contexts, different situations. So
right. So, what type of sentence is this first sentence?
And this is
what type of sentence is it? Okay. Yeah. What is this sentence? Yes, you're correct. Yes. Yes. When we have a paragraph, typically the first sentence is what? The topic sentence, and the topic sentence is really the main idea. And we know we've talked a lot about topic sentences also being starts with a C.
I'm sorry.
The topic sentence also is what? Starts with a C. C.
It is a claim.
It's a claim, right?
I would start with these.
Sorry?
Oh, can I start with these?
Okay, all right. Paso, are you good?
No, okay.
So this first idea is a claim. What do we know about claims? What is a claim, typically?
To be precise, strong,
Right.
precise.
But what does that mean, to be strong?
Something stated without making out.
Premise.
No, but
Okay, what else? There are three
arguable.
arguable. That is, somebody can come along and disagree with you. That's arguable. Two, what else?
Debatable.
Okay, arguable or debatable, same. Second,
Specific
needs to be specific enough, not too general. And third,
with some kind of evidence.
some sort of evidence needs to be supported by evidence. So when we use absolutes, first of all, think about the evidence that would be required to prove anything is always this. That's one thing. The second is it too general? Right? Is it specific? And usually when we use absolutes, we're talking it's too general. I usually, when I talk to students, I just say, well, look, human behavior, we can't say anything always happens or never happens. We can't, humans are dynamic and things happen, right? So when I talk to my students about these, we say, well, you actually make your argument weaker when you use absolutes, because somebody can say, well, that doesn't always happen. Maybe it happens 99% of the time, but what about the 1%?
Just with one example.
So you actually, even though you think you're trying to make a stronger argument, you're actually making a weaker argument because of the absolute. So we talked about importance, thinking, and this is, as you know, if we let them use the word important, every sentence is going to be important. They're going to use the word. So we generally try not to use this word. Well, any of the sentences, it is significant, it is important, it is vital, it is necessary, it is required. Those are typically phrases that I try to have students avoid, and right, just so that they can write more descriptive, more clearly, right? And I would say, like, because this is a topic sentence, I usually ask students to start with a subject, not a pronoun. Keep the pronouns within the paragraph so that there's no confusion about the antecedent of the pronoun. Because if there's another paragraph right? And we use a pronoun here. Well, what is it? Maybe it's the last thing that was mentioned. Maybe it was something that's someplace else. And that's the thing. A lot of my students they like to overuse pronouns to a point where it gets confusing. It's like, well, who is it, or what is it? Who is he? Who is she? So, and the last thing I'll say here is this sentence. What's the meat of the sentence? What's the most important concept in that first sentence?
The attitude.
Something about adapting a positive attitude. Would you agree? That's the main thing. Find the most important, when you're looking at a sentence like this and you're trying to figure out, well, how can I improve this sentence? First of all, look for the most important concept. And then do what with it? Where do we like to keep the most important idea? Usually at the subject. So think of it like this: adopting a positive attitude towards student speaking. Now make a claim. Exactly. Make a claim that's debatable, that's specific, and that you plan to provide evidence on, and then you have a clear idea about what it is you're looking at. When teachers adopt a favorable position towards students, they are also teaching students to develop a positive attitude. Okay. As a result, students will feel more confident when speaking oral tasks. Okay? So look at the second and third sentence. Thinking about rhyme and theme. Did the writer change the theme to the rhyme, or use the same theme to the rhyme? It changed.
The first one, the theme is teachers adopting a positive or overall position. And then the rhyme is like students, blah, blah, blah. And the third one is like the rhyme became the theme, and that's it.
Right. So change the rhyme to the theme, right? Okay. All right. Any other comments about this?
What happens when you don't have, for example, if you don't have, for example, in a paragraph, that you don't see the pattern theme and rhyme, or in the next sentence you can see the theme or the rhyme or rhyme or theme or whatever.
Right.
So in those cases, how can you correct that? Is that possible? That maybe you don't follow, like you have the topic sentence, and then the next sentence you can see the pattern. Theme and rhyme, and maybe in the next sentence the required role, the theme, and then a different rhyme. But then you don't see in the following sentence, you don't follow it. You don't say either the rhyme or the theme of the following sentence.
And your question is?
What's going on in there? Is that correct? Is that possible?
Okay. I'll answer generally without seeing an example. But I'll explain what I typically have seen. So we have a topic sentence. Let's say the second sentence is fine with rhyme and theme, but the third sentence is not, like Tonya mentioned. So it'll be the third sentence of this context, as an example. Here's one possibility, right? One possibility is the writer just jumped from one idea to the next, where I would say, okay, it doesn't work. This doesn't work. Estás brincando ideas, right? And it's kind of out of context. That's one option. That's one option. And then you lead them into a discussion of theme and rhyme. All right? Now, the second thing, which is a little bit more nuanced, that is, it's like a gray area, okay? And this is where you use your best judgment. The third sentence, let's say that it does not follow rhyme and theme looking at the second sentence, but it's still very much linked back to the topic sentence. And you can still make sense of it, because that is, a possibility. Okay, right now we've been talking about sentence to the next sentence, right? But of course, within the context, as long as it's relevant to the topic sentence and you're reading it and you can connect the dots, then I usually don't say anything, fine. Right? And I don't even go into that much detail with the students, because now the students can get confused a little bit. I mean, if it's like, well, you told me it has to be with this sentence, so I usually just have a discussion with theme and read and just leave it at that, sentence to sentence. But if whether it's intentional or an accident, they don't actually follow that for one or two sentences and it goes back and it still makes sense, because at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. It makes sense. That's okay. But, a lot of times, like I mentioned, they'll jump and it'll be obvious, right? It'll be like one idea and then the next sentence is a completely different idea. You're like, well, what's going on? Then you have to intervene and give some sort of feedback or discussion. I mean, that's what I've done. So I don't know if anybody else has any other comments about that or
I'm checking a photo that I have discursive writing and the aspects. Then another aspect, thin and green. And then a meal plan.
Yes.
I think the meal plan works really well. I just started working with this, I guess, last year, because I started hearing students talking about the meal plan, and I asked them, but I guess the meal plan works really well if they really apply it.
Yeah.
It makes writing really easy for them. That's what I've seen so far.
So my question is, in the meal plan, yes, it covers, well, you need to cover the thin and green.
Yes.
No? Yes.
Yeah, the theme and
that is why I'm.
Yeah, and so I use this meal plan because that's what when I was doing my doctorate, those are the things that I think about the meal plan. It's an acronym and it's easy to remember.
Yes.
But it allows students to recognize that there are different types of sentences. And I think this is a good time to look at some, let's see, where did I put those notes? Let's see, sorry. Come back to page 4 here. And notes, if you guys are looking at your notes in the wiki, I added some information here. This is related to the meal plan. Okay, and again, I primarily don't talk about this. I'll just share briefly today, but I don't talk too much about this with students because it can get a little bit confusing. But it's basically the same thing. The meal plan, right? The main idea, evidence, analyze, and link. And I describe a little bit about what that is. But we can also think in body paragraphs, we can look at claims, which typically are going to be the main idea, evidence, which actually is the same thing, and this idea of a warrant. A warrant. A warrant is simply a way to connect the evidence to the main idea in the topic sentence. It's to make sense, it's to connect the ideas, it's to bridge the two, so that the reader, there's no confusion as, okay, well, why is this, what's the relevance, so what's the relevance of this evidence, this example, to the main idea? It should not be, there should be no doubt. And so I tend to think of the warrant kind of as the analysis, the evidence as the evidence, and the claim as the claim. And then we have the link, which would be its transition sentence. But yeah, so this is kind of another way of looking at it. And whatever works for you. Of course, there are other ways to think of paragraph development, not just the meal plan. But I think students, for us, it gives us a way to communicate about what type of sentence needs to be in a certain part of a paragraph. And even though they complain about it, I think I think it helps them, because I see changes when we talk about how these different types of sentences should fall in place. So I don't know if you have doubts or questions about this.
Yes.
Yeah. The evidence, we haven't talked much about this, but this is another thing we talk about with students is evidence should explain what, or it can. It can explain what, and explain how, and it can explain why and when. So a lot of times when students are like, well, I don't know what else to say about this topic, Well, have you described how it happens? Have you provided evidence of when it happens? Have you provided evidence with whom it happens with? And of course, you know, one paragraph, you're probably not going to talk about all of these, but a lot of times they'll just talk about the what, and then they'll move on. It's like, well, okay, you defined it, but when does it happen? Or why does it happen? Or with whom does it happen? Try to think of the different question words, because with any main idea, that's what it's all about, right? It's describing, well, what is it? How does it happen? When does it happen? So, I don't know if that, does that help?
Yes,
okay.
I know.
Okay, because
Now I understand you better.
okay, all right. I think we've talked about most of these now. These are, again, discursive writing. We're talking about direct repetition, synonyms and hypernyms, pronouns, just different ways to connect ideas from sentence to sentence. We haven't talked about parallelism. We'll talk about that. Theme and rhyme we've talked about.
So typically, the pattern, those are the two options.
These are
In general, those are the two options.
simply stated. These are the two general patterns. But of course, when we have long complex sentences, we might change, you know, as long as the second sentence is coming someplace from the prior sentence, is the main idea. It's not so much that they can recognize if it's the same thing or new rate. But the idea is that they're not jumping from one idea to the next, that it links, you know, ideas. And if they do that, then their ideas flow a lot better. This all by itself, the theme and rhyme, when students are really having problems with cohesion, connecting ideas from one to the next, if they can get their head around this, which they usually can, their writing improves drastically. So, all right.
There you have direct repetition. Direct repetition is also part of the theme and rhyme.
It can be, yes.
Yes, that can be.
In fact, we saw the example with, well, the second example, or the first example, but it was example 2, where we had, what was the phrase? Learning experience.
Yes.
Yeah. So that was an example of direct repetition using pattern 1. And of course, it could also be used in pattern 2. Also. We could also use pronouns to connect from rhyme and theme. Pronouns. We could use synonyms, hyponyms, and hypernyms, absolutely. This is the most common right here. Using hyponyms and hypernyms, kind of rewording it, being more specific, or even more general. This was the example we used in class today. Okay. Are we okay with parallelism?
No.
Parallelism? So if I say, I like to read, swimming, and hiking, it wouldn't be parallel structure. We want to respect the same. And usually when we have a series, that's when we have a problem with parallelism. Students have
That the students sometimes I like to, and then reading, and
so
then a sentence or.
exactly. So it needs to follow the same grammatical structure. I like to read, to eat, to swim.
Okay, yes.
That's not a big problem, but occasionally that'll come up with students that I've seen. So, and this we really don't. I don't talk much about too much, unless it's just a discourse analysis course. I don't generally talk too much about anaphoric, cataphoric, and exaphoric references. Remember those? All right. So, but I threw it in there. A lot of this is just as a reference. For you to look at and consider. What else? Using the funnel system, basically just going from general to a specific. Okay. Okay, questions? Yes.
Something an extra, it is because in the first example about the experiences, yes, here, I noticed the connector furthermore. I was taught that furthermore is, you use it at the end when you are not going to add any more things. But like here, it would be like an addition or moreover. Is that true?
Is it true that it's only at the end?
It is true that, yes, that use it like a here, it is not that correct.
For me, this is okay. I don't make a distinction on. Yeah, you can say furthermore, in addition to, or additionally. It's just an additive connector, sentence connector.
So it is similar to moreover, or I would say here moreover, and then furthermore.
Say furthermore.
It is those things that I learned a long time ago, but because I was corrected so many times that I said, okay, furthermore.
For me, it's pretty much the same. Furthermore, it's just you're adding to what you just said. You're saying, okay, I said this, okay, now I'm going to say some more stuff about this. I mean, for me, it's pretty much the same. Additionally, or moreover.
Okay, and could I use furthermore and then moreover?
In another sentence?
In the same paragraph. Let's suppose that then I have moreover.
Okay, and this happens. So when we have, if we have one, like, all right, so we have furthermore, and then you have additionally or moreover. Yeah, we have to be careful about how many times using the same type of sentence connector in succession. We have to, I would say, most of the time we don't want to do that, especially with this type of connector, an additive connector, because it gets a little bit too repetitious. It's like you're saying, also this, also this, also this.
For example, you are adding evidence. So you say, moreover, and here I have another evidence, and here I have another evidence.
Right.
To make it stronger.
Okay, but let's go back to this. How does evidence function? It can be what, it can be how, it can be what. So here's the thing. If you say the first evidence is what, and then you say again about what, and then again about what, it gets repetition. But the idea is to transition from what, and then maybe how, and then maybe why, and then if you do that, you're not going to use an additive. You're going to use therefore or consequently, or you're going to use another type of connector because you're not using this exactly. And that's important too because sometimes this happens all the time with students. They'll present a very good topic sentence, and then they'll say in addition to, or furthermore, or additionally, and when you read that connector, you know that it's not evidence. Because they're just continuing the main idea. So you have to be careful, students have to be careful where they put the connector, because you're basically saying, okay, if I created an evidence about what, and I say, moreover, okay, I'm going to do another evidence about what? Moreover, okay, another evidence about what? Yeah. So, yeah, the connectors, that's where the cohesion part of writing comes in. It's like, are you using the appropriate grammatical terms to connect these ideas one from the next? Yeah.
Because well, you have like people have developed research on the same topics on different on the same topic in different contexts. So you say, well, this is the evidence in Australia. This is the evidence in UK. This is the evidence in Hong Kong.
Sure.
Yes. So
well, yeah, and you could say, all right. So let's say you have the first evidence. So in Hong Kong, they say this. All right. Now there's no connector. This is the first evidence. Now the second sentence, moreover, or in addition, or also, da da da. All right. And then that third one, if there's another piece of evidence that's talking about the same thing, I would choose another way of like using. Yeah, I would use like a complex sentence using a subordinated clause. Although these authors did this, blah, 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 blah. Now I just use their clause now instead of sentence connector to connect these ideas. So you just don't want to sound too repetitive, even though maybe you are talking about what, the whole paragraph's about what, and you're synthesizing information. Certainly that's possible. But you have to be careful with just the connectors.
Without labels, sorry to cut you off.
No.
Paragraph with this.
Oh, yeah, thank you.
No, 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 okay, yeah.
You need to put like a flash over there, something like that, lights, so I don't kill myself.
Somebody called it white floor.
Yeah.
Something that I also have noticed with students, is that they have problems writing sentences, but in terms of simple, complex, compound, complex sentences. They don't know how to, we just tell them, this sentence is incorrect because we're only using simple sentences in a paragraph.
Right. Yep.
And we know they know the sentences, but something happens in their brain that they don't use them.
They don't look at the writing from a discursive standpoint, like the discourse, like looking at it more, they just look sentence by sentence. But yeah, and what I see is they seldom use relative clauses. Like, yeah, they're okay with subordinating clauses sometimes. I mean, but boy, relative clauses, if you can get students to write relative clauses, that's a good thing, because a lot of times they just don't, I don't know, they don't use it. Yeah, so and we haven't even talked about sentence types, simple, compound, complex sentences, but all of these things come up. I mean, it's, in writing class, but yeah. Okay, any other comments so far?
Well, sometimes, well, what I have noticed is that sometimes they just forget about how to write in English, and they just start, because they are so focused on their topic, on their ideas, that they just think in Spanish and put it in English. But since I know Spanish, yes, I understand what they want to say, but I say this is written in English, with words in English, but it's Spanish.
Right.
Yes. So here, and it is, for example, when sometimes with weak students, but also with the strong students that they want to transmit like a complex idea, and they just think it in Spanish and put it with words in English.
Yeah.
So here you say, okay,
or they'll write really long sentences.
Yes, this is Spanish because
and a comma goes in like blah 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 comma blah 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 comma blah blah comma blah blah.
Exactly.
So that's another.
Yeah, that's another problem.
Comma splicks.
Run sentences. It's a run sentence.
Or comma splice. That's a big one. Comma splice, run-on sentences. Yeah, that's the challenge for them. So, okay.
To try to
And for us, because we have to try to.
And to try to explain it, how to do it.
Yeah. Okay, let's look at, I think there's one more. Let's look at one. I think we had time here a little bit. Do we look at this one? Oh, no. There's page number 1, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Let's see. Does that make it harder to read? I think it's harder to read. Just look at the first 2 sentences. Any observations? Just looking at the first 2 sentences of this paragraph. Let's just take a look at the first sentence. The first sentence of the body paragraph is what type of sentence? It's a topic sentence. It's the main idea. And we know main ideas, we can also refer to them as claims. So if looking at the first sentence, any comments about it being a claim? Like, is this a big claim?
Useful. Bueno,
Can you expand on that? What do you mean?
Bueno, es que right now I just thought of not like an appropriate word would be I feel it like an empty.
It could be.
What makes it empty? Now think again. What makes a good claim?
Arguable.
It's arguable. Okay, arguable, debatable. What else?
Specific.
Needs to be specific and
Evidence.
and needs to be based on evidence. So looking at those three criteria for, what are your comments about this?
It can be little useful, very useful, or not useful. So problem-solving activities encourages.
All right. If I came along and I said, you know what, problem-solving activities are not useful in raising cooperative interaction. Problem-solving activities are not useful for raising cooperative interaction in order to practice L2. I'm looking at it from whether or not is it debatable. Now, it's not always really clear, right? But I think it would be difficult to say that problem solving is not useful for raising cooperative interaction in order to practice L2 in an authentic way in general. Just looking at it from that first criteria, is it debatable? Because remember, it needs to be, when I say debatable, it needs to be a valid debate. Like, there's a strong point for it, and there's a strong argument against it. Because if you choose something that is not arguable, then you're weakening your argument. See what I mean? A good argument has to have a good counter argument, because if you can convince them of your initial argument over the strong counter argument, then you have a better initial argument. So just from that standpoint, and that's kind of the idea of, okay, what is useful raising, what's raising cooperative interaction, but that's one observation that I have. Now we can debate about, well, useful, what do you mean by that? How can we modify this, keep the same idea, but maybe express a stronger claim?
Problem-solving activities promote cooperative interaction, or facilitate problem-solving activities.
We've got some big terms here. We've got some wide, like for example, cooperative interaction, huge, right? Authentic, huge, right? Solving activities useful, and even in order to practice L2, huge, right? Those are three really general terms that I would start by saying, okay, can I be more specific about what is cooperative interaction? Can I be more specific about what I mean by practice L2? Can I be more specific about authentic?
This can be 3 topics and
I mean, maybe we just talk about problem solving
with
cooperative interaction.
And that's it.
Yeah.
And then I would say another one, it would be practice L2 in an authentic way.
Right.
Well, 2, I would have 2 instead of just 1.
Yeah, I mean, here's another way. They could talk about problem solving helps to promote authentic learning. And then in the paragraph, start with cooperative, do like a chain logic where they start, okay, cooperative learning, blah, 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 leads to this, practice, and then leads to this. But in the topic sentence, we just go from here to here. And then in the paragraph, we connect the dots. That's another option. Okay. Of course, there's a million options here, but this is this is what we can kind of look at. How do we attack this text? Where do we start if we're going to give feedback to students? Because we need to make suggestions, right? And we can say, and I know some of my students, I know they get frustrated when I have this conversation with them. When I have, if this is a student piece of work, I say, well, you could do this, you could do this, you could do this, you could do this, you could do this. They freak out. It's this, I don't know if you've read the book. Yeah, There's a book called The Paradox of Choice or something, where they did a study. It's a book about when you are given, and it's about buying stuff at the grocery store. When you have an option of buying 10 different salad dressings or whatever, you look at all those and you just go, you don't even choose. You move on because there's too many choices. But if you have like 3 choices of salad dressings, then you're more likely to choose one. And it's the same kind of thing. And so that's something that too, when we're giving feedback, it's like, how do we give feedback? Do we just say, okay, you got all these different options, or, you know, and that's a struggle. That's something that I work with all the time, because it's like trying to find that balance of giving them options, but not trying to give them too many options, because if you don't give them any options, then that's not good either. So it's
trying to give them some freedom.
Yeah. So anyway, that's something. So this, now look at this phrase. This kind, I think these kinds of activities. So where does these kinds of activities come from?
Problem solving activities.
Problem solving.
Talking about problem solving activities.
All right. What are your observations? Any comments about that? About this? These kinds of activities. Is that okay? Is that okay? Is that clear the way it is, or can you make some suggestions?
So here you can give some examples.
Okay. So it's because, is it clear what types of activities we're talking about? I mean, we know that they're problem solving, but we still really don't know what exactly we're talking about. And here's a good opportunity to get right to an example of a problem-solving activity. So let's assume we have an example of a problem-solving activity here. We have now our hyponyms and hypernyms. See that? Yeah. We have the problem-solving activity as a hypernym of something that we're going to mention very specifically here. It still connects the dots. We're still using the same theme you're reading, right? It's connecting nicely, right? And we're clear, because if we just say this, what's these kinds of activities? So, but what kind? Have different advantages that help students work in a more collective and profitable way.
So, for example, I would say these kind of activities have different advantages. For example, and I would talk about a specific one and give the advantage and explain what kind of advantage that specific activity, and then and give more examples. I would do that. Can I?
Advantages? Yeah. I mean, I'm just thinking here. It has advantages if students work. The thing I'm really not sure about is like I'd be looking for an example of a type of activity or some sort of clarification. Like problem-solving activities are useful. So we're going to talk about the what, the where, the why, the when of problem-solving activities. And it seems to me, since this is kind of general, that we might want to talk about what, but something a little bit more specific. Just give an example or some examples, okay, and to provide context, and then say these types of, not these types, but this, you know.
These activities?
Yeah, an example of a problem-solving activity.
For example,
reading, writing.
No, it would be an example of a problem-solving.
Finding a solution.
Finding a solution for writing. Like, let's say finding ways to give better feedback. Okay, finding ways to give better feedback helps students. I don't even need to say advantages because that's kind of empty. Helps students by, and then maybe work on this a little bit. Maybe it'd be a little bit more. What do we mean by collective and profitable? Right? Yeah, working together in groups, peer feedback, or whatever it is. I mean, that's not a perfect example, but you see what I mean? It's like trying to dig deeper into what we mean here. Some of the outcomes, and we probably want to generally state in the third person. We can get the students because let's see. All right, so we're using a semicolon. When do we use a semicolon? Yeah, I typically I say clauses, independent clauses. Yes, but to separate independent clauses. What's another function of the semicolon?
We have list of items, different lists. We have computers, telephones, and lists. Semicolon, and then
You mentioned something.
Another different list.
Right. It's when you have like a list within a list. So if you have a list within a list, you're already using commas. You use semicolons as kind of a hierarchical punctuation. So like, let me do an example. So if I say like, let's see. So I love apples, oranges, and bananas, semicolon, meat and vegetables. Now I need to use the semicolon because I'm using commas here in this series. So we have a series within a series. That's another function.
And also when you are adding some phrases, no single words, but you have a list and you have a list of phrases. So
An example?
You use like, for example,
I mean, let's see, I love
another phrase. Sentences?
like that.
No, because that's common.
Trying to think.
So, for example, I like when children play in the garden. Semicolon. When they, something like that. I like when children, I like okay.
Kind of like that, right?
Kind of.
Yeah, and that would be kind of separating two independent clauses.
Yes. So
It's not really a series, but I look at it like replacing the fan voice, the coordinating conjunction, right? So instead of saying I like apples and I like bananas, I can remove the connector fan voice and put the colon and divide it up. The problem is, when is it appropriate to, I mean, within the context? I mean, we can give them rules like that, but sometimes they'll overuse the colon sometimes, but, you know. Any other, we haven't talked much about punctuation. Does anybody have questions or something, issues with certain punctuation? Oh, yeah.
with the hyphen?
I don't want to. Because you have the normal hyphen and you have like a longer hyphen.
Well, one's a dash and a hyphen, right?
Okay, I don't know.
Hyphen is for words, dash is for phrases. Hyphenated words,
Okay,
yeah. Hyphenated words like, let's see,
like a 12-year-old girl.
like, yeah, like face-to-face class. Face-to-face would be a hyphenated word. And then a dash would be like a interruption of the text. So it'd be like a group of words. Yeah. Kind of like it's an interruption of thought, like you're writing, and then you interrupt, you put a dash to indicate that.
I see your one face.
Okay. It's kind of really different. Some of these are the outcomes we get from the students because of the number of people involved. We get more, okay, look at this. Like,
Yeah, I would
this
say
right
that's
here.
what I mentioned.
Yes.
Okay, I typically, it is a type of run-on sentence, but I give it a different type of classification. I call it just a comma splice. For me, a run-on sentence would be this.
How do you go that?
Let me get it. This for me would be an example of, let's see, where is it? Well, here. If we were to remove the comma, that would be a run-on sentence.
Okay.
When there's no punctuation at all, usually. Right? Now here, the comma splice, and this happens all, this is one of the big, most frequent types of errors that students commit is the comma splice. And the run-on sentence and the comma splice, to correct them, it's the same way to correct them. So you add a connector, you divide it into two separate sentences, you add a subordinate clause, so.
Because I think instead of having the semicolon, I would use these kind of activities that are referred as very period. Some of these are the outcomes we can get from students because of the number of things involved.
I personally don't have a problem.
We can get more ideas. It is like an explanation of.
Yeah, what we use, and this is where students have problems when we use it. The two ideas have to be very much related, right? If they're really like two separate ideas, we need to separate it with a period. But if they're very, very much related, then we tend to use a semicolon. So the question is it really related? So these kinds of, like the way some of these outcomes, yeah, I probably would, yeah, maybe I would divide it into two sentences.
Now, I don't get the relationship between, we can get more ideas with the previous one.
All right, so how do we fix it? Some of these are outcomes we get from the students because of the number of ideas. Some of these are outcomes we can get from the students because of the outcomes we get. And I don't know if they want to say as a result we get more ideas or. But yeah, it's not really clear. Because it almost sounds we can. Some of these are the outcomes that we get. It's the same.
One of the advantages you can have is that you can have more ideas because you have more people working together instead of just one or two. That's what I understand.
Okay.
Yes, I
see
get more ideas.
we get from the students. This is how, in this way, we get more ideas and then maybe say a little bit more.
So the people who are involved are involved.
Because
Because of the number of the people that are involved.
Right. Students may share their knowledge and their own points of view in order to solve the problem. Students may share their knowledge and own points of view in order to solve the problem.
Sometimes also in order to, it is not like operations.
Which one?
Like a students,
In order.
in order to, I have found that students, and I used to do that,
Yeah.
to overuse the in order to.
Yeah. Besides is an interesting connector.
Yes.
And I don't know if there's a L1, L2 interference.
Yes.
on there.
Yes, there is, yes.
Because, yeah, as you know, it's little.
Yes, because we say, besides means además. And we say, además,
Yeah.
this, and that is not true.
Right.
Besides.
Especially when it's, you're talking about it in the affirmative, like the positive, like if it's negative, maybe like besides, I mean, I have a hard time explaining besides, using besides when they use besides. Besides, like here, definitely I would just say also, moreover, or in addition to, or additionally. But besides for me is like when it's something contrary to and negative. I'm trying to think of an example, but like I don't know. That's one of those. How do you guys explain it?
No, it is because in that way I'm like a kind of descriptive, because I say, okay, besides, it is said that means además, but it is not used as our además. So if you want to be safe, it is better for you to use another connector like a in addition, moreover, like that, because with besides you are going to have a lot of problems. And that's it.
Yeah.
And that's it. So you decide if you want to have problems, continue like that. But it is because, yes, it doesn't mean además.
See, moreover, besides. Yeah, there's something there that's, this is where the descriptive prescriptive thing comes up.
Yes, so I say, okay. It is not that I say you should, but I say in order to avoid problems, don't use this word. Because
There's something about this, see, something that you said before, when you say it again, means it has some sort of negative reference to the first thing that you said. Besides, like it nullifies what you said before. I need to find an example so I can explain it, but there's something that, for me, it's not used the same as moreover. As not in, in use that I've heard it. Okay, so it's about out of time here. You can ask, besides, the exchange of ideas may act as a motivational reference to encourage. Now, we talked a little bit about motivables. Probably you could remove may and just say ideas act as a motivational resource to encourage hires to develop the concepts in a more intensive way and to consider the points of view. So we use points of view here, points of view here. Maybe we can use a hypernym or hypernym instead of direct repetition. Furthermore, a shared responsibility helps individuals to judge, to recognize, and reflect on the options given to solve the problem. And what could we add here? A comment, right? And yeah, to judge. No, that's okay. Why is that okay?
Because of the end.
Why is it okay to say to judge, recognize, and reflect? Why is that okay? What's the writer doing? Listing. What else? What is she or he not including here? The two. Is it necessary? No. We talked a little bit about the use of an ellipsis. I would classify this as kind of a type of ellipsis.
Yes. Appropriate would be if we say to judge, recognizing.
Right. Then we have a problem.
So
with
that's a
grammar.
problem, yes, so you would say like that.
Here, I would accept either to judge, to recognize, and to reflect, or as it is, to judge, recognize, and reflect. I would prefer the way it's written. To reflect options and give. So,
Bien. Mecánico no usas coma, así está bien.
Okay, any other comments, thoughts? We talked a little bit, we haven't talked a lot about punctuation. Do you guys want to talk more about punctuation later? Is there anything in particular about, just that's a big topic? The comma is a big deal. We can talk about some of the main uses of the comma if you want. But the comma splice for sure, students, that's one of the big problems with commas. And using it when they don't need to.
Exactly.
They overuse it.
And they forget to use it before and, but, or. And that is the first rule.
Yeah.
Yes, comma, and, comma, but, comma.
Between, I'm sorry?
Between the subject and the verb.
Yeah.
I say the other one.
Yeah.
Como aquí, como es.
But But not in those cases, but for example, when they were learning comma, it's like this, they have come out with why it doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Or putting a colon after a verb,
Yes.
that's another, thing, you should do that. Okay, well, we'll stop there. Any final comments? Today we kind of looked more brief, more in detail at organization at the paragraph level. I think tomorrow, will be our last day, we'll talk briefly about just introduction, conclusion paragraphs. We can talk about punctuation if you want. If there's something else you want to talk about tomorrow, bring your ideas in, send an email before. And so thanks everybody.
Thank you.
I hope that we can just include a link to Google or from Google to this, or do you think we need that?
I already have done that. I'm doing that.
Oh, you're doing it? Okay.
I need you to sign into Google and get into the course and just check it out. That's it.
Do we have to do something for the evidence?
No, I'm putting like the links like they want.
Okay.
The link, they took the link, they create the link. So right now.
I would prefer like activities like we did today. If you can go back and just leave comments. It's gonna help just to leave, and anything that you have in your Word Online documents, try to do what you can to continue working there. So again, because we have evidence that we're actually doing something, all of our sessions are being recorded as well. So I hope that will also help provide evidence, but also that you can access when you need to or want to.
Yes, because I think that it's important that they allow us to continue doing this kind of courses. Because I think they're a lot more useful for us.
I think so. I mean,
So
that's
yeah, it is when we have time to think, to really reflect on
and share
and
thoughts.
share and all of this, yes.
Yeah, so we don't want to get this. Get in
So
trouble.
they say, no necesitan bajar, they are not doing anything, and like that.
Right.
So,
Okay.
sí, como que la vean que that is very easy,
Yeah. All right.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. See you tomorrow.